On July 29, 2014, at 10 a.m. in room 2141, Rayburn, the Committee on the Judiciary will hold an oversight hearing. Okay, just let me know. All right, the Committee on the Judiciary will hold an oversight hearing on the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. The witness will be Director Leon Rodriguez. The main goal of this hearing is to conduct oversight over policies surrounding USCIS adjudication and processing of millions of immigration benefit applications for benefits such as deferred action for childhood arrivals, naturalization, asylum, temporary work visas, etc., each year, as well as programs run by USCIS. A background. Central among USCIS's duties is determining whether individuals who apply for immigration and citizenship benefits are actually eligible to receive those benefits. The ease with supporting documents can be created and obtained fraudulently makes this responsibility especially important. Each year, USCIS processes around 6 million applications and petitions, including requests for U.S. citizenships, lawful permanent residence, employment authorization, humanitarian relief, and other benefits. Most benefits requests are processed domestically at our 4 service centers: California, Vermont, Texas, and Nebraska. The National Benefits Center, 26 district offices, and 81 field offices. The burden of proof in establishing the eligibility for an immigration benefit always falls solely on the petitioner or the applicant. USCIS need not prove ineligibility. Each application and petition form includes specific evidence requirements necessary for approval. When an applicant or petitioner can establish that certain primary evidence is unavailable, secondary evidence, also in specific forms, may be provided. Experienced offenders become familiar with a wide range of submitted evidence. Sound judgment is required to determine which forms of primary and secondary evidence should be accepted in individual cases. Thank you very much, and we can leave now. Oversight of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services.
Good morning. The Judiciary Committee will come to order, and without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. We welcome everyone to this morning's hearing on oversight of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and I will begin by recognizing myself for an opening statement. Welcome to the House Judiciary Committee, Director Rodriguez. I understand that this is your first time testifying in front of Congress as the Director of USCIS. Your appearance comes at a time when Americans are feeling the repercussions of the illegal immigration crisis on the southwest U.S. border. Of course, if President Obama took seriously his duty to secure the U.S. border and enforce laws against illegal immigration, there would be no such crisis. U.S. Customs and Border Protection is the DHS agency getting most of the attention during this southwest border crisis. But there is no doubt that policies implemented by USCIS are a major source of the problem. And by that I mean policies such as deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA, a rubber stamping of credible fear of persecution claims, and even higher asylum grant rates by USCIS officers. DACA is a major reason for the influx of illegal immigrants to the United States. And discussion of the program is pertinent since USCIS recently announced the method by which the renewal of initial 2-year grants of DACA will be processed. And along with that procedure, USCIS made changes to the original DACA guidelines and requirements, including gutting the education requirements. I have previously expressed concern about the lack of any constitutional authority to implement DACA. The costs of the program, increased wait times for processing of legal immigration petitions directly resulting from DACA processing, and fraud in the program. Fraud is of paramount concern since an immigration system subject to rampant fraud is a national security risk. So I was particularly astounded in May when the USCIS added question and answer number 21 to its existing DACA guidance. It is an absolute invitation for fraud in which the USCIS virtually admits that it will not verify the validity of documents submitted by applicants as evidence of DACA eligibility. I understand that when USCIS leadership was asked about question 21, congressional staff members were assured that, quote, generally the majority of documents received are valid, end quote. But forgive me if such an assurance is not comforting, especially now that USCIS is broadcasting its lack of intention to even attempt validation. The USCIS processes over 6 million applications and petitions per year. I understand the magnitude of that responsibility, and the enormous volume of work should make anti-fraud measures all the more important. Unfortunately, what we have been hearing for years from sources at USCIS and even the USCIS union is the existence of a culture of getting to yes, unrelenting pressure on adjudicators to rubber stamp applications, and also of a culture where line adjudicators are routinely overridden when they deny applications or petitions. There are documented instances of employees in leadership at USCIS taking control of applications or petitions that have been brought to their attention by immigration lawyers or other outside forces. And I understand that there are ongoing investigations of such illegitimate interference in the adjudication process. The very notion that an application can be approved despite fraud on the part of the applicant, and that USCIS leadership will intervene if they get a call or email from an outside party interested in a certain visa application, is disturbing to say the least. We know that the President has promised more administrative action to allow unlawful immigrants to remain in the United States and receive quasi-legal status and the right to work. In fact, some of the different tactics he may try to take were even outlined in a set of 2010 leaked USCIS memos regarding administrative alternatives to comprehensive immigration reform and immigration administrative relief options. However, let's be clear, such policies of this administration, including many implemented at USCIS, as well as promises about future administrative legalizations, continue to encourage unlawful immigrant parents to smuggle their children into the United States. These policies and promises are putting money directly into the pockets of human smuggling and drug cartels, and they are undermining the fundamental constitutional principles that Congress creates the laws and the President is bound to enforce them. I'm interested in hearing how, under Director Rodriguez's leadership, the USCIS will no longer contribute to this state of affairs, and I look forward to the Director's testimony. It's now my pleasure to recognize the ranking member of the committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Goodlatte and members of the committee. In a nutshell, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services are vital in examining the young people that are coming across our southern border. And I want to suggest that before we leave for 5 weeks, that we try to ease the deportation of children and appropriate emergency funds, because we have too few judges, too few asylum officers. We have 243 immigration judges for 375,000 cases. We're talking about a more than 4-year background, my colleagues. And so youngsters with valid claims should have a speedier way to have that determined. Now, those without valid claims, I'm sorry to say, should be sent back. But that determination is what democracy is all about, and it's our responsibility to be careful at how we do this. I know the strong feelings about these youngsters pouring over here, but the question is, how do we dispose of it consistent with democratic principles that guide us? And nowhere should this be more keenly felt than the House Judiciary Committee itself. So we must determine, even though there may be violence, persecution, trafficking, we're at a recess and we still don't know. Throughout this session of Congress, there have been too many of us that have had but one theme. The president isn't enforcing immigration law. And this is a myth that has been debunked in hearing after hearing, where we have heard about record-breaking detentions, removals, and prosecutions. Still, the majority is not persuaded by facts and continue to blame the president for their inaction on immigration reform. Many of them have argued that the president's use of prosecutorial discretion is unconstitutional, and we should be removing young people who seek the opportunity, if they qualify, to live, work, and study in the United States. They've said that our laws protecting people fleeing prosecution and torture in their home countries should be rolled back, and that more of them should be detained for longer periods of time. And most recently, some have used a humanitarian crisis affecting women and young children in Central America to say that we can't fix our broken immigration system and provide relief to millions of undocumented Americans living within our borders. And that begins right in this important committee. So today, let's listen carefully. Over a year ago, the United States Senate passed a comprehensive immigration reform bill allowing millions of individuals to apply for earned legal status. The House majority has refused to bring the bill or its companion bill, H.R. 15, for a vote. The Congressional Budget Office tells us that we would reduce our deficit by $900 billion over 20 years through these proposals. And so this refusal to bring a bill to the floor, despite the fact that an overwhelming majority of Americans support comprehensive immigration reform, is something that I feel very badly about. If such a bill were brought to the floor, I'm confident that it would pass even the House of Representatives in the 113th Congress. And unfortunately, I'm beginning to think that the only immigration bill that we might ever see in this Congress will be a bill to strip protections that all of us unanimously agreed to extend to child victims of trafficking, persecution, and torture and abuse. And I don't feel or believe that I feel that we can do better than this. We were sent here to solve problems that demand action on comprehensive immigration reform. And so I urge my colleagues, majority and minority in the House, to end the delay and to start acting. And I join the chairman in welcoming our distinguished witness, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
I thank the ranking member. It's my understanding that the ranking member of the Immigration and Border Security Subcommittee would like to make an opening statement. Ordinarily, we would ask at this time that members put their opening statements in the record. However, noting her request and noting that the chairman of the subcommittee is not present, the chair will turn to the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz, for an opening statement, and then turn to the gentlewoman, and then we will put all other opening statements into the record. So the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz, is recognized for his opening statement.
I thank the chairman, and I appreciate you holding this. This is obviously a vital issue to the United States, and it is something that is exploding on our borders and exploding in this country. And as somebody who represents good, hard-working Americans who are doing the right thing, they're paying their taxes, they're working hard, they're trying to take care of their kids, they may be an individual who's just graduated trying to get their feet on the ground. There's a whole other wave of people that are coming here, and I happen to believe, Mr. Chairman, that there is a proper place for asylum for those people who are truly in harm's way, whose life is in danger. This is a country who's had open arms, but we're being taken advantage of, and by great numbers. The flow coming across our border is just absolutely unbelievable. By every metric, every account, everything I've seen, people who are coming here and trying to take advantage of the United States of America and our generosity are overwhelming the system. And the consequence is we have people who are legally and lawfully trying to come to this country. And we've been ignoring those people. The people who are legally and lawfully getting in line and trying to do it the right way, they're trying to come in the front door. What about those people? Because the resources that we've had to take to those who aren't willing to play by the rules have put a great strain upon the system, a huge strain upon the system. And that's why I think this hearing here is so vital today. We have to address some very important topics. those people that are coming across and claiming asylum, and they're not just coming from 1 or 2 countries. When I went and visited the border and I went to the detention facility in Phoenix, they were represented from 60 different countries that were trying to come across the border. They were overwhelming the system. When I visited the Phoenix ICE office and we were talking to them about what's going on in the system right now, you had people literally knocking on their door every day saying, please arrest me because I want to get in the system. And the system generally works like this. You come in, you make your claim, you're going to get some sort of court date. Now in Phoenix, when I was there, what they told me, and this was in 2013, is you would get a court date in 2020. In the meantime, what are you going to do? You're going to say, well, I've got, because my court date is so far in the future, I need to be able to work. And then we grant these people a work permit. So now they get free education, free health care, and they have a work permit to compete against somebody who is legally, lawfully here, whether they're on a green card or whether they're maybe a United States citizen competing for those jobs. Again, we can be compassionate, but the reality is President Obama and this administration has created a magnet, and the magnet says this: come step foot in the United States of America, and nothing's going to happen to you. There's not going to be a consequence to this. It's unfair. It's not right. The president owns this issue. The president has created this situation. There's a reason why, particularly the unaccompanied minors, are flowing across the border because they don't feel like anything's going to happen to them. We're going to take care of them. We're going to actually, we'll go ahead and take you, and then we'll pass you off to somebody else. If you had a little note in your pocket, we'll pass you off to somebody else. Do we do any background checks on who we're passing these minors to? No. No, we don't. Do we check the legal status of the person we're handing them off to? No. This administration doesn't do that. It is fundamentally and to its core wrong. And a key part of this system is what the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services does along with this process. We got a lot of good men and women, patriotic, they're working hard, they're trying to do the right thing for their country. But I worry about the direction that they're giving, the direction that they're being given by their management. And I worry what this administration is telling them to do or not to do. And that's of deep concern. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you holding this hearing. A lot of members have good questions. I look forward to hearing today and yield back.
Chair thanks gentlemen. Recognize the gentlewoman from California, the ranking member of the Immigration Board Security Subcommittee, Ms. Lofgren, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by welcoming our witness not only to today's hearing, but also to his new position as Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. I think it's fair to say that USCIS doesn't usually get the kind of attention that the rest of the components of DHS do, but its mission is very important. As we know, USCIS adjudicates a wide array of immigrant and non-immigrant petitions, families hoping to reunite, businesses searching for talent, persons fleeing persecution and torture, lawful permanent residents applying to become American citizens, all go through your agency, and it's critically important to our country that your agency perform well. It's also important to point out that the USCIS is responsible for all these important activities without any taxpayer money. It's entirely fee-driven, except for a minor amount that's basically used to implement E-Verify. All of the applicants pay for the services they receive. Now, why is this important to our country? You know, I sometimes mention my grandfather, who came to the United States at the earliest 20th century, got on a boat, got off the boat, and I'm in Congress today because he had the courage to want the American dream. And the director's own story of his family fleeing Turkey and Poland to escape anti-Semitism, and to Cuba, and then fleeing Cuba to escape communism. And here he is today, part of the rich American fabric. You know, I've always admired immigrants who have enough get up and go to get up and go. They made our country, and we who are here have inherited that rich history, and we're now in a position to help shape the future for those who will come after us, and it's incumbent that we preserve that legacy. Now, there are many topics that will be discussed today, but I want to touch on the issue, because it has already been mentioned, about the children, the unaccompanied children, who have been apprehended at the southwest border. As we know, these individuals are under law, are placed in the safekeeping of the Department of Health and Human Services, but it is USCIS asylum officers who determine whether there's a well-grounded fear of persecution. And in the director's written testimony, he explains that almost 65% of the asylum applications filed by unaccompanied children that have been adjudicated this fiscal year have been approved. Now, some argue that this somehow means that there's a rubber stamp of these applications, or that the asylum system is vulnerable to fraud and abuse. I look at that statistic and think that these are vulnerable children who are fleeing persecution and extreme violence, and they are thankful that they are receiving the protection to which they are entitled under domestic and international law. And I think it's worth pointing out that an application for asylum isn't illegal. That's part of our immigration laws, and it has been since after World War II. Now, children who've been abandoned, abused, or neglected, and who obtain a state court order can apply to USCIS for special immigrant status. The director notes that over 3,900 applications for this SIJ status have been received this fiscal year. And those of us who went to South Texas this month know that these applications require a finding by a state court that these children have been abandoned. I mean, a state court makes that determination, and it's only then that the USCIS will proceed. Now, children who've been victims of severe forms of human trafficking are eligible for a T visa. And it's important that we maintain and defend this procedure. As Mr. Conyers has pointed out, we had a nearly unanimous vote in 2008 that put the Congress and America on record saying we will fight human trafficking and we will make sure that the victims of human trafficking are given safe haven in the United States. Much of this discussion in the Congress and in the country has overlooked the fact that the Wilberforce Act is about human trafficking, slavery, and sex trafficking. And if we are to eliminate the protections in that act, what we will be saying is that we will once again countenance the victims of trafficking being returned to their traffickers. I will say this, that we did make an exception for the children from contiguous countries, and we have learned, much to our sorrow, that those exceptions need to be revisited, because the United Nations, at our request, has reviewed our processes and found that children from contiguous countries who have been trafficked are in fact being returned to their traffickers. With that, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to this hearing, and I yield back.
The chair thanks the gentlewoman, and without objection, all other members' opening statements will be made a part of the record. And we now thank our only witness, the director, for joining us today. And Director Rodriguez, if you would please rise, I'll begin by swearing you in. Do you swear that the testimony that you are about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect that Director Rodriguez responded in the affirmative. Mr. Rodriguez serves as the Director of the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, the Department of Homeland Security agency responsible for administering and processing immigration benefits, including asylum, naturalization, and visa petitions. Prior to joining USCIS, Mr. Rodriguez was first an assistant U.S. attorney in Pittsburgh, led the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division, and served as the head of the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Health and Human Services, respectively. He attended Brown University, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts in History in 1984. Mr. Rodriguez received his JD from Boston College in 1988. Thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to your testimony. Your written statement will be entered in its entirety into the record, and I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time, there's a timing light on the table. When it turns yellow, that means you have 1 minute left to summarize your testimony. Thank you, and thank you for being here today, and you may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Goodlatte, and good morning, Ranking Member Conyers, Congressman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Lofgren, and the other members of the committee. I am extremely honored to be the new director of the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services and to be before you today. I hope that today is the beginning of a long and fruitful and constructive relationship that I will have with this committee as a whole and with its members in particular. I am also honored to be the leader of more than 18,000 extremely dedicated men and women who are the employees of United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. I have worked in many different government positions. I have worked in the private sector. And I can say, even after this short time in office, that as a country, we really should be pleased to have the extreme level of talent, commitment, and work ethic that characterizes so many of the people that I've had the opportunity to meet in these last 3 weeks. I accepted this job because I am a patriot. I am a patriot who believes that America is indeed unique in its freedom, its equality, its energy, and its enterprise. And those qualities are the product of the kind of people who are in this country and who come to this country. They are people who work hard. They are people who take risks. They are people who are dedicated to making a better life for their family. And those kinds of people come from all over and do all kinds of things. They can be tomato pickers. They can be physicists. They can be captains of industry. They can be plumbers. And for me, the challenge as Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and the reason that I am embracing this challenge, is to create a fair and efficient system for those individuals to find a place in our society. I am the son and grandson of immigrants. My parents did flee communism in Cuba, and my grandparents fled both anti-Semitism and hardship in both Turkey and Poland. And these certainly are motivators for my work here as well. Like so many, my parents hoped for a better future for me and for my sister as well. I have spent the majority of my career as a law enforcement officer. I don't need to have done that to know that there are many people who wish the United States harm. And so I do view it as a very solemn and important part of my work to safeguard the security and safety of the United States. I'd like to relate two particular experiences that I've had during my few days as Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. I had the honor of attending a naturalization ceremony where 53 different countries were represented, showing the remarkable energy and talent that continue to pursue the dream of becoming new Americans every day. And I had the opportunity recently to meet with the recently returned refugee processing team from our Refugee Asylum and International Operations Division that had recently come back from Iraq. These are incredibly dedicated and talented public servants who I can say with great confidence inspired me when I heard the stories of the work that they do. Now, we have some challenging issues to talk about today. I have no doubt that we'll be talking about the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. I can say that as a former prosecutor, I have exercised discretion. I have worked for leaders who exercise that discretion. That is not anything novel in the various enforcement enterprises in our country. It is my view that DACA provides an opportunity to exercise prosecutorial discretion. For example, for an individual who I just met who was about to receive her degree at Harvard, or another individual who was in medical school and trying to decide whether to be a dermatologist or an OBGYN. I imagine we will also speak this morning about the crisis at the border. And I think, as has been noted, the President has indeed recognized this as a very serious problem, as has my agency and as has Secretary Johnson. I would like this morning to talk in more detail about how our asylum process works and the degree to which these asylum claims actually play a role in this crisis. I look forward to our continuing conversation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Rodriguez. With the indulgence of the committee, I'd like to take a few minutes away from this hearing to talk about someone who was a dear friend of mine, a mentor, and a member of the House Judiciary Committee. My predecessor representing the 6th District of Virginia, Congressman M. Caldwell Butler, passed away last night around midnight. He served in the House of Representatives from a special election in 1972 until his retirement at the beginning of 1983. He served on this committee, I believe, that entire time, and he served here with great distinction at a time when this committee went through some very difficult issues, including his being very actively involved in the Watergate investigation and in the impeachment proceedings related to former President Richard Nixon. He was a public servant in the truest sense of the word, and he has given immeasurably to his country, his state, and his community, Roanoke, Virginia, where he lived his entire life and to which he was extremely dedicated. He attended the Roanoke Public Schools, and he was an undergraduate, earned an undergraduate degree at the University of Richmond and his law degree from the University of Virginia. He was admitted to the Virginia Bar in 1950, and he commenced practice in Roanoke. He also served in the United States Navy. He served in the Virginia House of Delegates from Roanoke from 1962 to 1971, and served as the minority leader from 1966 to 1971. He was a friend of everyone who knew him, and someone who I had great respect. He will be badly missed. His wife, June, passed on just a month ago, and it is a great loss for the Roanoke community and for our country, and I thank the committee for allowing me to remember him for a few moments here. The gentleman from Michigan served in the House of Representatives and on this committee with Congressman Butler, and I would love to recognize him for a few words.
I thank you very much. And so did Zoe Lofgren serve with him, and I remember him very well. There are very few conservatives that I remember going back that far as clearly as I remember him, because he was an impressive member of the Congress, and we exchange views on a almost regular basis, but our friendship was never impaired by the different perspectives that we had on how government should run. And so I join you, Mr. Chairman, in observing and remembering a distinguished member of the House Judiciary Committee, and I would like to yield to the gentlelady from California for any comments she might
I
add.
appreciate your yielding, Mr. Chairman. I was a young law student working for Congressman Don Edwards, also a member of the committee, and I remember Mr. Butler very well. He was a person who we all admired. Even if we didn't agree on everything that he thought, he was a man of tremendous principle, totally honest, and totally brave in standing up for what he thought was right and the Constitution, and he will be greatly missed. I count myself as one of his many admirers, and I remember him quite fondly from my days as a young staffer, and I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman from Michigan and the gentlewoman for California for their remarks, and we all offer our sincere condolences to the Butler family. They are in our thoughts and prayers in this difficult time. It was a great honor to know and to have the privilege of working for Caldwell Butler. I learned a great deal from him over the years, and his guidance and wisdom will be missed by me and many others. I thank you all for allowing me to say a few words, and we'll now turn to the questioning of Director Rodriguez. Director, I know that you are new to the job, so I would like to get your perspective on some things that have concerned us greatly and see whether there is an opportunity to correct some things or to clarify what the USCIS is doing in certain areas. As I mentioned in my opening statement, question 21 of the revised Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, frequently asked questions states, will USCIS verify documents or statements that I provide in support of a request for DACA? And USCIS answer is, quote, USCIS has the authority to verify documents, facts, and statements that are provided in support of requests for DACA. USCIS may contact education institutions, other government agencies, employers, or other entities in order to verify information. This answer seems to put applicants on notice that USCIS, in most cases, will not, in fact, verify the validity of documents submitted to satisfy eligibility requirements, and thus the frequently asked questions invites fraud. If USCIS takes seriously its stated anti-fraud commitment, why is it a good step to basically notify potential applicants that documents will not be verified? You may want to pull that microphone closer to you. I don't think it's turned on either.
There we go.
There we go.
I really appreciate the opportunity to work with you and this committee on various concerns that they may have. And as I understand, the concern here is the suggestion that there will not be a systematic verification of the authenticity of documents presented at the time of DACA renewals. It is my understanding that there is scrutiny of these documents, certainly at the time of initial application. We have a robust fraud detection and national security directorate that includes a number of former law enforcement and military officials among its ranks. That engages in a variety of systematic checks of any individual who seeks any sort of benefit from USCIS as to criminal history, terrorist behavior, possibly other threats to the United States. And our adjudicators also receive training so that they can, in appropriate instances, flag applications for benefits that appear to present fraud. It is for that reason that the agency felt comfortable in saying that in the ordinary course of business, while there would not be a specific attempt to authenticate particular documents, that there is an ability that our adjudicators have to look at documents, and if they do present concerns at the time of the review during the adjudication process, to flag those applications for further review.
A great many applications contain fraudulent documents. It would seem to me that a better policy would be to say that the documents are going to be reviewed and to leave applicants with the impression that they should not submit fraudulent documents, that they will be checked, and that if they are found to be fraudulent, that there are severe consequences that would befall someone submitting fraudulent documents to your organization.
Chairman, I appreciate the concern that you have raised. I am in the process right now reviewing all of the agency's processes, and certainly one of the things that I will be dedicating special attention to are any issues related to national security or fraud. Those are certainly high priorities for me.
Let me go on to another question. The President has indicated his intention to continue to act administratively to change U.S. immigration policy when and if Congress does not do so in a manner to the President's liking. He has previously acted on DACA, expansion of parole, reducing the issuance of notices to appear for unlawful immigrants, prosecutorial discretion regarding removal of unlawful and deportable aliens, and several other means. As you entered the agency a few weeks ago, you must have received a briefing on the status of the next administrative action. So would you please tell us what is next on the President's agenda?
Let me be clear, and I think the administration has also been clear about this. No decisions have been made. The directive that we have received is to examine possibilities for different avenues to exercising that prosecutorial discretion. I know that our Secretary is in a process of engaging with frontline employees at DHS, members of Congress from both sides of the aisle, and stakeholders from a broad spectrum of American society. That process is ongoing, and no decisions have yet been made in that process.
The Speaker's Border Crisis Working Group, of which I'm a member, recently met with Secretary Johnson. And during that meeting, I asked the Secretary what would be needed in order to address the surge in those claiming credible fear. Secretary Johnson indicated that a change in law to strengthen the credible fear standard would be necessary to fix the current situation. Do you agree with Secretary Johnson that such a fix is needed? Secretary Johnson then said that while a fix is needed, now is not the appropriate time to fix the credible fear standard. When claims have gone from 5,000 to an estimated 50,000 in a short number of years, and your testimony indicates that those claiming credible fear are part of the surge, why is this not the time to fix this weak standard?
I'd like to put this issue in a little bit of perspective. At this point, roughly 15% of individuals being apprehended at the border are presenting credible fear claims. We have surged our own capacity to address these claims. We have moved personnel to the various border processing areas, such as Artesia, to process those claims. We have accelerated our review time to a period of 8 days, so as to ensure.
Well, thank you.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so as to ensure that we adjudicate those claims as efficiently as possible, I think because we've been able to, at least USCIS has been able to surge in that manner, I think that is the basis for which the Secretary may have suggested that now may not be the time to address this particular issue.
Well, in point of fact, the initial credible fear hearing is now resulting in 92% of those cases being approved to move on to the next status in the process, which involves the detention of people or releasing those people into the United States. And as we know, a great percentage of those do not return for their subsequent hearing. So it would seem to me that increasing that standard and doing it now would send word to people that if they truly are seeking political asylum in the United States, they should state that when they come to this country and be prepared to show that it at least is more likely than not that they have a case that deserves to go on to that final hearing rather than simply being rubber stamped through, as I would argue they're being now.
Yeah, Congressman, I think I would not necessarily adopt the view that these claims are being rubber stamped through. I actually, on my third day in office, sat in on a credible fear interview. I'm a former prosecutor. I've conducted probably thousands of interrogations myself. I was very favorably impressed, actually, by the quality of the interrogation that I saw, by the probing nature of the interrogation that I saw. So I do think these interviews are being conducted in an effective manner. That said, the legal standard to establish credible fear is obviously a threshold standard that only then qualifies the individual for later adjudication.
But those later adjudications are now rising to approval rates that approach 70%, which is, to my knowledge, much higher than it has been in previous years.
And acknowledging that concern, Chairman, I look forward to a continuing conversation about this issue.
The Chair thanks the gentleman. The time has expired, and the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, for his question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you discuss, Director Rodriguez, the sheer numbers that we're talking about? How many young people have come across our southwest border so far this year and last year and the year before?
Congressman, I apologize that as I sit before you, I can't tell you the specific numbers. Certainly those numbers have grown. over time. They remain essentially in the tens of thousands, but it is the fact that those numbers continue to grow.
Well, I have 50,000 for 2013, 25,000 for 2012, and an even lesser number for 2011. Does that figure in agreeably with your thoughts on this?
Yeah, my general understanding is that the trend until very recently was an upward trend. I think that trend has begun to level off. One thing I would note is I've actually started reading Latin American newspapers in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Spanish is actually my first language. And there are increasingly stories in that media, one about individuals being returned, two about the fact that DACA offers no benefit to these individuals. And I think that and the marshaling of efforts by the government, and specifically by my agency, appears possibly to have started to take some effect with individuals in Central America.
Now, what about personnel? I mentioned just a handful of judges and so forth here. I don't think we can realistically, on your 15th day in office, ask you why we aren't doing more when I have some pretty low figures of personnel that you have.
Well, I think one of the, this is actually my 5th transition, Congressman, into a new agency. And one of the key aspects of doing that is you need to be ready to drink from a fire hose, jump on a 100-mile-an-hour train, chew gum, and rub your head all at the same time. And so I've been busy trying to do exactly that. What I do know is the agency has recognized this additional burden. It has added 150 asylum officers, or is in the process of adding 150 asylum officers, noting the additional demands that are being placed on it, at least in part by the situation at the border.
Now, you were the lead attorney in United States versus Flores, which involved the enslavement of Mexican and Guatemalan nationals who had been smuggled from border areas in Arizona to farms in South Carolina and Florida. What, if you can recall, did you get out of that experience and in working with vulnerable populations, and how do you think it may positively affect your work as the director of this very important office that you hold now, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services?
Thank you, Congressman Conyers, for that question. Prosecuting that case really was a career highlight for me. On many levels, I have to tell you, I was inspired by the stories of the victims that I met in that case. These were individuals very often from indigenous areas of Guatemala. For many of them, Spanish was actually a second language. Their first language were actually indigenous dialects in those countries. Yet these were strong, hardworking, really amazing individuals, and the opportunity to vindicate their rights and to fight the victimization that had occurred to them was really an important career opportunity for me. It certainly sensitized me to the fact that human trafficking and labor exploitation are very serious problems that particularly befall individuals who work in our shadow economy, as these individuals did. And that certainly will influence, will sensitize me to certain issues that USCIS faces.
Well, I think your experiences have prepared you well for your responsibility, and we want to work as closely as we can. This committee has a great concern about this challenge at our southwest border, and we'd like to stay in touch with you far past your 2 weeks and 1 day on the job.
I look forward to a very fruitful relationship, Congressman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Conyers. And the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Coble, is recognized for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rodriguez, good to have you with us this morning. Mr. Rodriguez, the Bush administration required that certain employers, such as federal contractors, those employing foreign students in the optical practical training program, and others, use E-Verify. What plans do you have to expand mandatory E-Verify use?
Right now, there obviously are a very limited segment of employers who are actually subject to mandatory E-Verify. I have been pleased to say that the accuracy rate for E-Verify is at a very high level, and that our ability to adjudicate temporary non-confirmations appears to be very effective. And then employers who utilize E-Verify report at very high levels, report satisfaction with that system. Our agency has in fact prepared a report to this body, which was delivered some time ago, that talked about what would be required to move to universal mandatory E-Verify. It is a capability that we could achieve. And I look forward to a continuing conversation about how we get there.
I thank you for that. How do you ensure that employers, strike that, how do you ensure that those employers required to use E-Verify, such as federal contractors and employers of students in the optical practical training program, are in fact using the system?
Congressman, I will acknowledge that I am, as part of the many things I'm trying to learn as I come onto the agency, I've not yet had the opportunity to brief on that specific issue. I certainly would look forward to following up with your office about the steps that we take to verify utilization by that particular portion of employers.
If you would keep us current on that, I'd be appreciative to you.
You can count on it, Congressman.
When will the USCIS implement its programs to allow individuals to lock their Social Security numbers for work authorization purposes in an effort to prevent the number from being used fraudulently to obtain employment or a job?
I do understand that we have the capacity to lock Social Security numbers in those instances where we believe a Social Security number is being used fraudulently. I am not familiar with the ability of specific individuals to lock their own Social Security numbers. I imagine they can ask us to do it. Again, that is an area where I look forward to working with your office to make sure we get you the answers you need.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Coble. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott, is recognized for his question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Just a bit about the present process. If we're going to shorten the wait period for determining status, obviously we have to hire more personnel. Who do we need to hire, and how much will it cost to significantly reduce the time for hearings?
I am in the process right now of reviewing various issues related to wait time. I do know that there was a time when, for example, our I-130 petitions, the family petitions, where the wait time for those had become unacceptably long. The agency has been able to restore the wait times to about a 5-month, a more acceptable time frame. I'm going to continue as part of my transition into the agency to look at this issue of wait times to ensure that we are moving as efficiently as possible. It's important to note that we are a fee-funded agency. There are pressures on us from all sides to do all kinds of things with our fees. We need to live within our budget, is the bottom line. And so we're going to continue to look at how we operate most efficiently, deliver the highest level of customer service within the fee structure that we have.
What kind? You mentioned 5 months. What is your goal? Is there any way you can get down to a couple of days?
The goal for those is about 5 months. I'm not sure that we would ever be in a position to get it down to a couple of days for those family petitions. There are other categories that we are able to process far more quickly. In some cases, we're required by law, actually, to process certain benefits more quickly. That goal really represents over time what has been seen as the target time for adjudication of those particular benefits.
Now, the people are entitled to attorneys at their own expense. I understand in many cases there are pro bono attorneys available. Is that true?
I have no doubt that there are pro bono attorneys who are available to assist people with various aspects, various immigration issues.
What do lawyers typically charge for these cases when they're paid?
I don't know, Congressman. I imagine actually that there's probably, just having been a former private practice lawyer myself, I imagine there is a wide variety of what lawyers may cost in this particular field.
If someone is deported, where do they go? Where do they go? Right.
Your mic's not on. Director Rodriguez, your mic is not on. You might want to repeat that last sentence.
Sorry.
There you go.
My agency, of course, Congressman, does not handle deportations and enforcement and removal. I did have some little bit of experience as a private practice lawyer with the removal process. This can vary a lot. My understanding generally is that people are in detention in some cases, and at some point they are sent back, generally flown back to their country of origin. But honestly, because it's not what my agency does, I'm not fully familiar with that process.
We've had an influx of young children coming to our borders. Have other countries experienced similar influxes?
I am at least aware that Mexico has had its own influx driven by many of the same factors as the individuals coming to our country. I'm not fully familiar with where else those individuals might be going.
Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time to the gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. I have just a couple of, I'll have many questions, but I wanted to address the issue of in absentia rates. Oftentimes we hear complaints that the unaccompanied children don't show up for the immigration hearings. In fact, I've heard some of my colleagues across the aisle say 90% of the kids do not show up. PolitiFact correctly ruled that claim as false. Most recently, the Department of Justice testified before the Senate that, a little bit of half of the kids show up, but we now have a complete picture because the American Immigration Council has analyzed the raw immigration court data made public by the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse. They looked at every single case of juveniles appearing in immigration court beginning in 2005 through June of this year. Looking at only closed cases who were of children not detained, over 60% of the children appeared in immigration court. But here's an important data point. When the child has a lawyer, 92.5% of those children appeared in court, and it never dipped below 89% in any fiscal year. So I would like to ask unanimous consent to put in the record the analysis prepared by the Immigration Policy Center indicating this very high appearance rate.
Without objection, the analysis will be made a part of the record, and the gentleman from Virginia's time has expired. I'll recognize myself for questions. Director Rodriguez, my first one is this. Last Thursday, the New York Times reported on a leaked DHS memo laying out a program to allow individuals in Honduras who are not eligible for refugee status to be paroled into the United States. As you know, historically, parole has been used in very rare instances on a case-by-case basis for temporary admittance for urgent humanitarian reasons or a significant public benefit. Your own website notices that parole, quote, is used sparingly to bring someone who is otherwise inadmissible into the United States for a temporary period of time due to a compelling emergency. Since the USCIS grants parole, would you tell the committee how such a program intended for a large group of individuals would not be an illegitimate expansion of parole authority? We use parole for aliens who are clearly not being persecuted. Why isn't that a violation of current law?
First of all, I think it's important to underscore that in this area as well, no decisions have been made. Secretary Johnson, my colleagues throughout DHS recognize the significance, the importance of dealing.
Would you agree that if such were to occur, it would be unprecedented?
I would not be able to say.
Okay, well, give me an example where there's a precedent for such type of action.
Well, again, I think the main thing is that any parole program or any other sort of program would need to be according to certain criteria.
But if we ever had a program, assuming that the leaked memo is accurate, we've never had a program where individuals in another country have been able to take advantage of the system as the President, presumably, or you have proposed. And I can't think of any precedent. Again, can you think of any precedent?
I could not specifically tell you whether there is or is not a precedent at this point. I underscore that no decisions have been made. I will say that we are working very hard throughout DHS to find solutions to what we all agree is a significant issue being presented at our border.
Okay, if there is a precedent, we'd all like to know it, but I assume that you can't think of one that there is not. Let me go to my next question. Even the USCIS union has stated that USCIS adjudicators are being pressured to, quote, get to yes, end quote, on petitions and applications for immigration benefits. Don't you agree that any USCIS emphasis on adjudicators having to meet quotas of the number of applications or petitions adjudicated in a day undermines the integrity about which you seem concerned in your opening testimony?
You know, interestingly enough, Congressman, I think for as many individuals as have told me that there's a culture of getting to yes, I've heard other individuals saying that there's a culture of getting to no. Let me suggest that the culture we need to have and the culture that I have observed is a culture of getting to the right answer.
Right. Are you aware of any pressure on the adjudicators to try to get to an affirmative answer?
I am aware that those allegations have been made.
I know, but are you aware of any incidents where that has occurred?
I am not aware of any specific incidents where that has occurred.
Okay. Let me go now to the program that's already been mentioned several times today that was unilaterally instituted by the President 2 years ago that has allowed almost 600,000 individuals to stay in this country who were previously in an illegal status. And among the documents that could be proffered by these individuals to show that they were eligible for the program are educational records, employment records, and military records. What I'd like to ask you is how often does USCIS actually verify whether the educational records or military records or employment records submitted are actually valid and are not an indication of fraud?
Congressman, I would not be able to give you a specific percentage as to when that occurs. What I would be able to tell you is that it is my understanding, based on my initial review of how our agency operates, that extensive training is given to our adjudicators.
I understand that, but if you're not going to verify the records, if you're just going to take them at face value, that's an open invitation to a lot of individuals to apply for the legalization program and have pretty good confidence that they're going to be approved whether they're eligible or not.
Well, but our people are trained to look for indicators of fraud.
Right. Why wouldn't you be able to give us an estimate as to how many out of 100 applications would be verified?
I'm not able to. I'm not sure that we've studied that in that way. It is the sense that I get from the staff that does this work that their judgment is that most of these documents are in fact valid and authentic.
Okay. Thank you, Director Rodriguez. That concludes my questions, and the gentleman from California, Ms. Lofgren, is recognized for hers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Director. I wanted to ask a little bit about how we are doing the credible fear interviews for families detained in Artesia. Now, it's my understanding that the committee staff has requested data regarding the positive and negative, and we don't have that yet. So I'm looking forward. I guess you don't have it yet either, but we're looking forward to receiving that. But here's some of the concerns that have been relayed to me. Recent news reports indicate that there was a 9-year-old boy from Guatemala who threatened to commit suicide while he was there if he was deported, but that he was sent back anyhow. That there are other instances where families were put on a plane and actually then were taken off when consular staff was able to provide information that they would be killed if they were returned. So here's my question. It's my understanding from attorneys who have represented some of the older children that the credible fear interviews are being held in groups. For example, a mother would be interviewed with her children present. I think that's problematic because if that mother has been the victim of rape or other kinds of serious matters, she may be reluctant to discuss that in front of her children. Similarly, older children who might have been subject to sexual abuse might be reluctant to say that in front of a parent. So I'm looking to you to see, is it possible to have these credible fear interviews done with the necessary privacy to elicit actual truth from some of these individuals? And if they don't have a fear matter, they will be removed. But if they are in fact a victim of trafficking, we want to find that out.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for that question. It is my understanding that our staff is trained first to interview children, specifically in techniques required for interviewing children. I'm a former sex crime special victims prosecutor, and I know full well that is a different process than interviewing adults. And also generally for interviewing people who have endured some sort of trauma. I am aware of the concern that you raise. As part of my transition, I will look into these particular concerns as soon as I can and to determine whether there's anything that we need to do differently.
I appreciate that, and we'll look forward to receiving further information from you. I wanted to address the issue just briefly of the data that was recently transmitted by the Department about the number of unaccompanied children applying for asylum. And I would ask unanimous consent to put my analysis in the record. But I think it is flawed data because it does not include the children who receive special immigrant juvenile status because of a state court has found them to be abandoned, and certain trafficking victim visas and the like. So I would ask that you review that analysis, Mr. Director, and see if you concur in the analysis. I also want to talk about the need for efficiency in the agency, and it's tough to do, but coming from Silicon Valley, it's important to me that we do it once, do it right, and not come back. And for example, I recently had a situation that came to my attention from a business case where there was a request for evidence and notice of intent to deny that don't make any sense. For example, one case where there was an allegation that the business person had departed the country, but he hadn't, and he'd been able to disprove that, but he had to prove it over and over and over again, the same point. And I'm looking for you prospectively, how do we get technology deployed so that these matters aren't relitigated, wasting the time not only of the government, but of the businesses and families that rely on quick resolution? And then a final question on the 5-month I-130 delay. On the business side, we allow individuals to pay an additional fee for rapid adjudication of a matter. We haven't really gotten into that on the family side, but I'm wondering if we could look at that. For example, if you're an American citizen and you marry someone from another country, the 5 months might be fine. You have no plans to leave the United States, you know, whatever. But if the spouse is a technology business guy in the Valley, he's got to travel all over, and it might be worth a substantial fee to get it resolved because of the need to travel. So could you take a look at that opportunity to see if you know, the different family circumstances could be accommodated in that way?
Thank you for both those questions. I would like to share that for me, one of my top challenges and top priorities is tackling our agency's information systems. In many cases, the systems we have are either paper systems or legacy electronic systems that really are not enabling us to operate. We're operating very well, as much as anything else, because of the ingenuity and work ethic of our people. But we could be operating even better if we had the kinds of modern information systems that we could use. And so for me, making sure that at a minimum before I conclude my tenure, that we can see the light at the end of the tunnel for those challenges will be a top priority. I think your second question was whether we can look at the possibility of premium processing for other benefit areas than the kinds of business visas where premium processing is now utilized. And I certainly will look into that and communicate with this committee about those possibilities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
There, thanks to the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your service, Mr. Director. My first question would be this. My district is basically most of the city of Cincinnati, most of the greater Cincinnati area, and we're down in the southwestern portion of Ohio. And they oftentimes refer to our area as the tri-state area because we've got Kentucky right across the Ohio River there, and Indiana is right next to my district as well. So they call it the tri-state area. There was an article recently printed in the Cincinnati Enquirer that indicated that thus far there have been 842 of these unaccompanied children that were. Well, let me ask you a question about that first of all. And we keep referring to them as children. I've also seen an article recently that pointed out that actually something like 91% of them are teenagers. Is that, to your knowledge, is that accurate? And I understand, of course, that there's a big difference between a teenager that was 12 and just turned 13 and one that's 19 and just turned 20. But your understanding, would 90% or so of these folks would be teenagers rather than like little 5 or 6 year old kids?
First of all, let me let you know that I've spent a lot of time in your district. I had a case as a federal prosecutor in Cincinnati and really enjoyed my time there. The question really for us is a legal question, and under the law, these are children in terms of what their rights are under the law. And
right, I understand. I'm an attorney as well. We called them for years infants, even if if they're under 21 years of age, the age of majority, which is now in Ohio, for example, come down to 18. So we call them infants. But in general terminology, when people think of infants, they're talking about a baby. So my only question really thus far is, do you know, is it accurate to say that 90%, the article said 91, but 90% of them are teenagers, meaning that they're from 13 to 19?
I don't know specifically what
that's
the
fine.
age spread is of these
okay,
children.
thank you. So getting on to the question that I put the question within. So 842 are apparently going to the tri-state area, and I think 360 of those are to Ohio, the state that I happen to have one of the districts in. Now, exactly how many are in the greater Cincinnati area didn't point out. But my question is this. It says that they're going to families, for example, going to individuals. They're trying to kind of farm them out to different people. They're going to watch them until their hearings are ultimately held or whatever happens. But how much of an effort is determined to determine the legal status of the people that they're going to?
So, Congressman, what I'd have to share is that I'm a little bit outside my lane here in the sense that the actual placement of these young people, these children, is conducted by the Administration of Children and Families at HHS.
So you don't know that?
I really don't know
Okay.
what
All
they
right.
do to deal with
Because
it.
it would seem to me that that would be, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but it seemed to me that would be a pretty important thing to be determined by the executive branch of the government, and probably the legislative branch ought to know that as well. But if we're taking folks that are here, and I hesitate to say they're here illegally because of the way the law was written, which was supposed to deal with trafficking issues where people were criminally trafficked, and so legislation was passed back in 2008, as we know, and so there's some questions whether they're here legally or illegally. But the point is, if people that don't have really legal status and that a lot of Americans are concerned about are here, and then we're putting them with people that are also here illegally, maybe under different circumstances, that doesn't seem like a very good idea to me. Would you agree with that? Even if you don't know the figure.
Again, I'm outside my lane, so I don't want to substitute my judgment either legally or for a policy matter from the individuals who are actually responsible for that placement.
Okay. Well, let me cut you off because I have one other question I wanted to get to. As you're probably aware, carnivals and fair industries rely on laborers, H-2B seasonal guest workers to supplement their domestic workforce, and these fairs are important to American agriculture as they not only serve as the primary showcase of our grown in America products for the public, but also for the important fundraising which supports youth and civic programs. Beginning in early December 2013, a significant portion of H-2B employers in the mobile amusement industry paid premium processing fees for expedited USCIS handling of their H-2B petitions. And apparently there's a long delay going on relative to actually getting approval of these, and it's setting back a bunch of businesses across America. And if, because I'm running out of time here and it's going to be tough for you to answer the question, if I could have my staff follow up with you to see if we can't determine why that delay is happening and expedite that matter so we can get folks hired here who we really do want to come legally. Can we work together on that?
Yes.
I see a thumbs up. I appreciate that very much, and I noticed your staff are in the background also nodding in the affirmative, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman.
Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair very much. Mr. Rodriguez, congratulations on your prior service to this nation and now a new start in your service to this nation. President, as they say, befitted himself well, as he always does, in your appointment. I think it is important to take note of what I heard as I came in, as you were explaining to Mr. Conyers an extensive background where you understand your responsibilities of enforcing the law, but you also understand the plight of people. And so let me start, first of all, by asking about the plight of people and the ability of this government to balance, particularly under immigration services, following the law, those surges that may come for reasons of fleeing. And I know that there is an Office of Refugee Resettlement that has dual hats in state and Homeland Security as well. So why don't you just give me a brief philosophy? I have a short period of time and I have some more pointed questions, but just, how do we balance that? You've been a prosecutor. We are on the Judiciary Committee. We're not calling for the violation of laws, but we're trying to find that balance. How do you see that balance?
Congresswoman, I certainly appreciate you pointing to my experience as a prosecutor. Every chief prosecutor that I've ever worked for has exercised prosecutorial discretion in some way. They have determined priorities. So when I was a street prosecutor, we knew that we needed to dedicate more prosecutorial resources to murderers than to individuals who were trying to get on the subway for free. And so similar principles apply in our immigration processing as well. I think your question is also, how do we deal with surges? And one of the things that I've been pleased to see as the new director of CIS is, we've dealt with surges in our work for different reasons at many different times. In one respect, the first surge was actually the birth of our agency. Our agency was created in the early part of the Bush administration. It was separated away from the former INS. That required a huge lift by leadership and staff in order to make this now an independent, fully functioning agency. When DACA came along, we had a surge as well, and we learned a number of very useful lessons from that experience, which we can apply for whatever surges we may face in the future.
Let me thank you for that. You made a very valid point. I just want to take a moment of personal privilege to acknowledge the late Leonel Castillo, who was a constituent of mine, a neighbor of mine, who was formerly on the Immigration Naturalization Services Commissioner under Jimmy Carter. I just came to my mind, and I'm just making a moment of personal privilege on that. And I only say that because he seemed to have had that same philosophy. That was many, many years ago. As I look at the work that you all have to do, 10 million applications, over 50 different types of petitions, applications. A prosecutor always lays out his or her case. To win, I think you have to be orderly. From your perspective, a comprehensive immigration reform structure, obviously it is the work of the executive and Congress, but a ordering of the responsibility that you have, which would then see an enhancement of staffing. It would see more resources, because one of the proposals, of course, are the fines that individuals would pay to get in an orderly line, no, not in front of those who've been in line. What's your assessment on getting order to the immigration system in America?
So, of course, thank goodness we're not charging fines. We're actually charging fees because these are
and I stand corrected,
immigration
they are
opportunities.
There'll be a multiple of fees
that individuals are paying. I think order is the sort of the core business, one of our core business objectives.
And would you add to that, because I see my time is going, that you started out, but that we can add the question of dealing with humanitarian crises in your whole answer. Thank you.
Yeah, and we have to, of course, address those aggressively when they occur. I think that's the nature of your question.
Well, the nature of my question is that if we pass comprehensive immigration reform, you sort of put in order all that you're dealing with now. You have the ability through laws to address these questions. Would it be better to have an order that allows you now to get your hands around the many disparate aspects of immigration in this country, one of which are individuals here to work that are already here in this country?
That is what we've done. That's what we will always do, is balance our different lines of business for the most efficient processing across our lines of business.
And the EB-5 petitions, are they something that you can work with as well, that generates jobs and other aspects of economic opportunity?
Yes, the EB-5 petitions are. We are in the process right now of effecting some important changes that were started by now Deputy Secretary Mayorkas, among other things, centralizing our EB-5 processing and fully staffing the EB-5 office with economists and other sorts of professionals who will really enable us to very efficiently and correctly process those applications.
I think, let me just say, the chairman and I have looked at this issue. I think we had some legislation that was moving at one point in time, and so I'm looking forward to the ordering of that, because I think there is merit to the EB-5 in terms of its investment, if it is in an orderly process, and as well the benefits that come. But I want to make sure that the benefits are not overly excessive for the investment and the job creation that is so very important. And I'll just finish on this note. Is it important for a nation that has shown itself to have been built on immigrants and laws to have an humanitarian element to continuing in this process of immigration even in the 21st century? We know what we did in the 1800s, the 1900s, the 20th century, in terms of the flow of immigration. Do we still have that role now in the 21st century?
I wouldn't.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Backus, for his questions.
Thank you. We've had several words that have been used time and time again here this morning. I've heard the word discretion. I've heard the term humanitarian. You used the word freedom and enterprise. You stressed that pillars of our democracy. But I've heard discretion, discretion, discretion. I've heard you say that 6 times. What I hadn't heard you say is rule of law. You're a prosecutor. You enforce the law. My parents, your parents are immigrants. They came here legally. You know, they followed a rule of law. What I'm seeing here is when you have a rule of law, there's a reason. And you may exercise discretion toward someone that violates that law, but there's also the victim. We also, you know, you dealt with a lot of victims. You met with those who survived their death a lot of times. I want to talk about, and someone on the Democratic side said, plight of the people. I'd like to talk about those that are suffering from the president's actions on encouraging, and I think it's encouraging. He admitted that DACA has incentivized unauthorized immigration, particularly with respect for children. He said that's a problem. That's why people are sending people here. Plight of people. The New York Times, I'm going to talk about a very conservative paper, and that's the Cameron Smith, who's general counsel for the Alabama Policy Institute, very conservative organization. And the New York Times, they agree on one thing. They said the program, talking about DACA, is benefiting some immigrants, but it extends the visa wait for others. He talks about DACA and the lengthy backlogs on visa and citizenship applications where people are following the law. You mentioned all the people that have been transferred to the border from immigration to deal with these children. What the New York Times said, and this is an article I'd like you to read, maybe when you get back, February the 8th, 2014. The long waits came when the agency, your agency, shifted attention and resources to a program President Obama started in 2012 to give deportation deferrals to young undocumented immigrants, according to administration officials, not me. And they go on and talk about U.S. citizens petitioning for green cards for immediate relatives are at a high, if not the highest priority in the way Congress sets up the immigration system. But there's nightmare story after nightmare story of a man coming back from Czechoslovakia, his wife, a citizen, having to wait 8 months and still not hearing. A family in Australia, he's American, she's Australian, they have children. He's been back for 6 months. They're still there. I don't think it was intended. In fact, the Congress also passed a resolution here just July the 8th saying there are now 900 children in Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, waiting on being united with their adoptive parents here in the United States because immigration quit processing these applications and assigned it to the State Department, and the State Department has slowed down on it. Now, I don't know why you did that, but there's a resolution, and this is, I'm going to submit for the record a letter signed by about 20 Democratic senators, Elizabeth Warren, Mitch McConnell, Republican, but on both sides, and about 90 of us from the House that said, please process these claims. Please pay attention to the Democratic Republic of Congo and quit slowing these things up. I mean, so the victims, just like the New York Times said, the program benefits some. DACA is benefiting some. You're having children coming here. You're offering humanitarian things. But we've got a lot of relatives and families that are being separated because you have taken resources. And even the administration in this letter said you've taken, because of this plight on the border, some immigrants extending visa wait for others. These are people that go through the process. And let me close with what Cameron Smith said in the Birmingham Business Journal. The governance by rule of law is being challenged as it may be in times crucially important to the American system. Well, by circumventing immigration law, the President has encouraged even more unlawful immigration. In response, America has the choice to either create yet another incentive for unlawful activity by caring for immigrant children and attending to their health needs, or processing those who are going through the system. I'd just like to submit this to you and say to you, please don't sacrifice families in Asia, families in Europe, and deploy all your resources about these children. You know, it tugs at our heartstrings. But what you're not seeing is all these examples of people who are suffering. And rule of law, you're a prosecutor. Rule of law is what this country's built on.
The gentleman's very eloquent, but his time has expired. Is there a question in there to the Secretary? Well, if you could respond. If he wants to respond, we'll give him.
And I don't know if you're aware of the resolution for Congress on the Congolese children.
Yeah, no, I look forward to reviewing these materials. I am aware of the Congo situation. I would look forward to discussing that with you. I am committed to the rule of law. That's why when I mentioned to Congressman Smith the question about the culture of getting to yes, for me the culture is the culture of getting to the right answer under the facts and under the law. And absolutely, we have an obligation of stewardship to the people that you describe to run an efficient and fair system.
All right, thank you.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Chu, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. First, I would like to put into the record this document from the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles on their recommendations pertaining to oversight of USCIS at the Department of Homeland Security.
Without objection, it will be made a part of the record.
Thank you. Director Rodriguez, I am gratified to hear that you were a prosecutor and that you were in a strong position to challenge false claims, to tell truth from fact. And what I want to know is whether the current credible fear system works. I understand that the current credible fear asylum system is a robust process that requires an asylum seeker to demonstrate a significant possibility of succeeding in demonstrating a past persecution or well-founded fear of future persecution to an immigration judge. So, Mr. Rodriguez, could you briefly walk us through what an asylum officer does when conducting a credible fear interview, and how does the officer test the credibility of an applicant, and how does the officer determine whether there is a significant possibility that the individual could be eligible for asylum?
Sure. Thank you, Congresswoman. I appreciate that question. I don't mind sharing really one of the most important sort of transitional activities that I've conducted was actually sitting in on a credible fear interview. It's important to note that the credible fear standard is a threshold standard. In other words, it is not the final determination of whether somebody gets asylum. It's simply a threshold determination to determine whether that individual, who otherwise is in an expedited removal proceeding, can fully assert those claims. I observed the credible fear interview. I understood it to be based on a basic rubric that is used by the Asylum Office to evaluate those claims. And it asked questions specifically targeted to determine whether, in fact, the individual could potentially show a credible fear of persecution or torture on various bases: race, national origin, membership in a particular social group. From that interview, I was satisfied that there is an appropriate matrix of question and appropriate training to our asylum officers to assess those individuals, given what is the threshold standard that applies under credible fear. And I'll be continuing to look into that to satisfy myself that my initial assessment is correct.
Well, in fact, I would like to know about that training. It's my understanding that asylum officers receive extensive training to detect fraud and make credibility determinations, such as through the USCIS Academy. Can you elaborate on how they are trained to detect such fear? And would you say that USCIS officials are effective in detecting such legitimate cases of credible fear?
Thank you, because I realize I hadn't answered that portion of your initial question. And yes, the manner in which the questioning was done did ask questions that go to the question of whether the individual presenting the credible fear claim is themselves a credible person, in a sense whether their story hangs together, whether it makes sense, given both the general facts, the country conditions, and the applicable legal standard in that case. Now, I am not fully familiar with the exact training curriculum. That is something that I'll look into and make a judgment about.
And then are they effective?
And whether they're effective. I will. My sense is that the interviews are effective. My initial assessment is that they are effective in determining whether that threshold standard is actually met.
There are those in the public who are saying that the increase in asylum applications are evidence of fraud in and of itself. I'm struck by the fact that not only has the recent increase in credible fear claims been driven largely by an increase in claims from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, but the percentage of cases from those three countries that have resulted in a positive finding of credible fear have also been increasing. Mr. Rodriguez, is there a reason to believe that deteriorating conditions in those countries explain the increase in credible fear claims and the increase in credible fear findings?
Congresswoman, the deteriorating conditions in those countries are in fact well documented in terms of violent crime, human rights abuses. Those sorts of concerns are in fact well documented, and in fact there is reason to believe that they play a role in the situation we're seeing at our border.
And are they to be distinguished from the other countries in Central America?
I am most familiar right now with the Northern Triangle, because it's really where a lot of our workload is coming from. I know that similar concerns have emerged from other countries in Latin America and frankly throughout the world.
And finally, temporary protective status for Filipinos. This is very important to individuals in my district. Since the devastation of the earthquake, we have been constantly asking for that temporary protective status so that Filipinos could send remittances and get protective status. What is the status of that?
I appreciate that question. There is, as you know, ongoing consideration as part of an interagency review process to determine whether temporary protected status should be granted in the case of the Philippines. That process is ongoing. I do know that prior to my arrival, the agency expedited a number of other benefit categories for which various Filipino nationals or Filipino immigrants might be eligible in order to afford relief to those individuals in that area. We'll continue to work on concluding the evaluation of the TPS process.
I hope it is soon, Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Forbes, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Rector, thank you so much for being here today. And let's just cut to the chase. The President is not enforcing the immigration laws, because anytime you issue an order for the massive, unilateral, non-prosecution of individuals who are breaking the law, that's by definition not enforcing the law. And what bothers me even more than that, because I recognize there's some people in this committee who don't want him to enforce the law, other people that want him to enforce the law. But when we have the head of the ICE agents unions sitting in the chair right beside you, and the head of the border agents union, 12,500 people who, unlike you, have been on the job much longer than 3 weeks, who have conducted literally thousands of interviews with these individuals coming across the border, and they say unequivocally that the reason we're having this crisis is because of the President's policies, and they've told the President that through their agents. That's what concerns this committee. But one of the other concerns we have is this. They're concerned about gang members that are being released and coming through because their efforts are being taken somewhere else. So I want to ask you this. In that probing interrogation that you talked about earlier that you were so impressed with, if during the background check or other information that's uncovered during the review of a request for deferred action, an individual's presence in the United States threatens the public safety or national security, is it not true that that individual will not be able to receive deferred action?
That is correct.
All right. Does gang membership qualify as a threat to public safety or national security?
Without a doubt.
Does former gang membership qualify?
In general, yes, former gang membership would also be a potentially disqualifying.
If an individual renounces to their membership in a violent criminal gang, are they eligible for asylum or withholding from removal, or are they continued to be recognized as a potential public safety or national security threat?
Generally, they would be seen as a threat and denied a benefit, but again, these things depend on facts and circumstances.
Well, I'm talking about your then your testimony earlier was that if they were a member of a gang, then they would be viewed as a public safety
That
and
is
national
correct. If
security
they are
threat.
a current member of a gang, then they would be denied.
All right, and my question is this. How do you know? I don't think they have ID badges or membership cards that they have. If it comes up that they have, are you asking them in the interview if they were ever a member of a gang?
Yeah, among the things that I've prosecuted in the past is organized crime, specifically.
I got all that. I just want to know. I don't question.
Well, no,
your
but
good
I
prosecutor.
want to tell you about my ability to judge what I'm seeing.
No, I appreciate that. What I want to know is what your agency is doing in their interviews. Are they asking the question, are you a gang member or are you not a gang member when they're doing these interviews?
The agency, through the Fraud Detection and National Security Directorate, is doing a robust series of checks to determine whether an individual has a disqualifying
Are they
criminal
asking the
history.
individuals if they've ever been a member of a violent criminal gang?
I am not able to speak to that specific
See, that's
question.
what just absolutely frightens me when you come in here and you can testify about the broad, comprehensive nature we need to review and change this process, when that's asked to you by the other side of the aisle. But when we ask you a simple question on the fact that you have testified that gang membership constitutes a public safety or national security threat, and we don't even know if we're asking that question, that gives me pause for concern. If you don't know if we're asking the question, do you know what an individual would have to do to renounce that gang membership? Do they just have to say, I'm no longer a member?
Congressman, I'm looking into those issues right now. It is my understanding that we have generally been very effective at screening out individuals who pose some sort of national security or criminal justice threat.
You know, Mr. Director, I don't want to be harsh on you. It's just, can you understand why the American people are so frustrated with this administration? When you come in here and you say gang membership is a threat to national security, it's a threat to public safety, and you as the director don't even know on the interviews if you're asking the question if they were a member of a gang, and you don't know that whether or not they can just say, oh, yes, I was a member, but I'm no longer a member. That is concerning. And I'll finish by this, and then I'll let you respond. When the border agents who are having to do this are telling us they're worried because we're letting gang members in the country, and then we find you don't even know if we're asking that question, that's a big concern to us, and I'll let you respond because my time's up.
Sure. What I do know is where we do have cause to believe that an individual has been in...
Because the question, it'll be asked every single time in every interview, if you think it's a public threat and a national security issue, which you testified it was. And to say if you have cause, if somebody shows up and they make the allegation, you ought to be at least asking that question if the border agents are saying this is a big concern. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back with a great deal of frustration.
The Chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Gutierrez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking forward to writing my letter to Leader Pelosi. I want to come back to this committee in the next Congress of the United States. Nothing's more interesting than coming to this committee each and every time. Well, guess what? Welcome, Mr. Rodriguez.
It's good to be here.
Hey, you finally heard the Republicans say they love a union. One union only. Of course, it's the union that helps them promote the kind of xenophobic attitude towards immigrants that they like to promote in the Congress of the United States. And that's unfortunate, but they do like a union. Finally, there's one I don't know if they're members of the AFL-CIO or what they are. It's the Border Patrol. But just so that we get clear, he keeps talking about the testimony about the ICE union. Are there ICE members on the border stopping people from crossing the border?
My understanding of that is the responsibility of U.S. Customs and Border Patrol.
There we go. So there's one union you should stop talking about at the border, since ICE agents aren't at the border of the United States. But why let the facts get in the way of a good story? So here, once again, we talk about gang members, gang members. Do you ask 5-year-olds whether they're in gangs?
Again, I am looking into our
you got to ask them all,
now.
right? Got to ask them all. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds.
It is my understanding that when we believe that somebody presents a national security or criminal justice threat based on the biometric data that we collect, then we do follow up. I imagine we don't often do that with 5-year-olds, or probably never do it with 5-year-olds.
That's what I thought. But they're probably going to want you to ask 5-year-olds if they're in gang members, because do you check them for Ebola, for the Ebola virus?
Well, I do know that individuals...
they're very concerned about that.
I do know that individuals do receive health screenings at the border, Congress.
They do receive health screenings. So maybe next time they're going to ask you, you should check them, see if they have that virus before they contaminate everybody in the United States. So when they come across. So what we hear here constantly is about, and just so that we have clear, I wish I had the article, but it appears the American public, 70% of the American public, looks at the children at the borders as refugees. They don't look at them as people coming here to take away jobs from hardworking American citizens. They look at them as refugees. They don't look at them as, gun-toting, tattoo-wearing, disease-ridden, criminal elements that are coming to destroy America, but as refugees. And I would suggest that people go down to the border and visit. And I think you will see that they are refugees too. There's going to be another trip, bipartisan trip, this coming Thursday. I look forward to participating in that. And I guess I'm a member of the Intelligence, the Select Committee, Permanent Committee on Intelligence. And we have absolutely no reports from our intelligence services. And this isn't these guys. These are the guys that are there to protect us and everything. And they're saying they have found no relationship between those people crossing the border and gangs. None. They haven't been able to find any. They're searching because they want to find some for you, but they haven't found any yet, any connection yet. I'm not trying to say that there aren't any, but it's just not the prevalent case. What you have is children fleeing violence, fleeing poverty, and trying to reunite with their families. All of those things are true. I want to ask you a question, because there was a time in California when they had good old Governor Pete Wilson kind of decided he would propose Proposition 187, using similar language that is being used today about disease-ridden, gang-banging, tattoo-wearing people taking away jobs and corrupting American. So he proposed Proposition 187 so they wouldn't be able to get educated. Do you know how many people became citizens of the United States of America in like 1994, 95, and 96?
I confess that I don't actually know how many people became U.S.
Over 1 million. Over 1 million. Promoted by none other than Pete Wilson. So Pete Wilson said, you know, I really don't like those immigrants. And you know what immigrants did? They came. But here's the issue, Mr. Rodriguez. You know, it was $95 back then. It is now how much?
It's my understanding that the naturalization fee now is at I think it's about $680.
So it's a lot more than it was back then. Are you doing anything in order to make citizenship? Because it just seems to me that if somebody wants to become a permanent resident of the United States, that is, they don't, you know, they just want to renew their permanent resident, it's around the $400 range, but it's over $600 if you want to become a citizen. Why is it so much more expensive if you want to be a citizen if you just want to be a permanent resident?
The price of any particular benefit, the cost of any particular benefit, is determined by the time and effort involved in adjudicating that benefit. So naturalization, we're talking about language interview, we're talking about a general interview. So there is a significant time and effort involved. We have to pay our own way.
My time's up, so I don't want to.
And we do have fee waivers that are granted to about 20% of our applicants.
Okay. Just, you might want to decide, thank you for the indulgence of the chair, you might want to decide to kind of switch That is to say, if I want to make a permanent relationship with the United States, i.e. be a citizen of the United States, you might want to have that cost less than I just want to maybe hang around for 10 more years, right? Not make that permanent. Because the guy that does want to become a citizen, or the woman, he learns English and civics and takes a big chance because he might fail the test. Whereas the other person just pretty much automatically gets extended for 10 more years. You might want to switch that around. Since there are 8.8 million permanent residents that can become citizens today, 6 million of them Mexican nationals that can become citizens overnight, you might want to think about that so they can defend themselves against those that would portray them as tattoo-wearing gangbangers.
We thank the gentleman. Now I recognize the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Rodriguez, I do appreciate your testimony. I'd like to give you a little bit of a narrative of what's in the front of my mind listening to this, and that is that I took Mr. Gutierrez's advice last weekend and went down to the border and started at the mouth of the Rio Grande River right there at the physical border. Planted a flag there, by the way, and worked my way upstream to all the way to Laredo. Stopped in at multiple places in Brownsville and McAllen, other places on up the river, and received briefings at those ports of entry from Customs Border Protection, from Border Patrol, from each law enforcement entity that's down there, including the Department of Public Safety at Texas and Texas Rangers, and talked to people on the street. And here's what comes out of that for me, and that is, and they will all tell us, that DACA is the magnet, and one of the excuses is the 08 law for the other than Mexican unaccompanied alien children. That is developing into a broader policy because it's being exploited, and these children are being sent into the United States at the expense of the American taxpayer. But I met with them. I went also to an HHS not-for-profit subcontractor who are housing 188 of the unaccompanied alien children between the ages of 10 and 17. There were 144 males and 44 females. That's the 188. And there and many other places we learned this. They said that in some cases 100% of the females that are being sent out of Central America are given birth control before they leave because it's anticipated that they will be raped along the way. I don't believe that number is 100%. I see other numbers that are less than that. But those that are sexually abused, the reports that we got in asking this question at nearly every stop ranged between 1/3 of the females that are coming up. And this is the children, the under 18 children, between 1/3 of them raped and up to 70% of them raped. That does comport with the expectation that handing them birth control pills. So apparently it's this. I expect that my daughter, my granddaughter, my niece, my neighbor, whoever it is that's in custody when they send them, is going to be raped, and I can deal with the sexually transmitted diseases and the mental trauma and the physical trauma as long as she doesn't have a baby that comes along with that. That seems to be the psychology. And we went into the centers where they are detention centers in the Border Patrol, and we saw unaccompanied alien children, males and females. We saw mothers with nursing babies. We saw women that were ready to have a baby, and we watched that process go all the way through, and we went to the bus station to see where they're being dispatched out across the country. I did go and do these things, and here's, the asylum is a big piece. Sunday night, we sat at a border crossing upstream from that crossing and downstream from Laredo, and I have in this phone here a video of a raft of 2 coyotes that loaded a pregnant female in it and brazenly took her across the river within plain sight of the Border Patrol and the local city police, deposited her on the shoreline. She gave herself up for asylum, and before she gets a hearing, the baby is an anchor baby. There's not a level of anxiety down there about this happening on an hourly basis in broad daylight in the front of the Border Patrol, in the front of the city police. There's anxiety on my part because I'm watching the rule of law being deconstructed by this administration. I have in my hand here, this is a request for proposals from your operation dated June 19th, which I'd ask unanimous consent to introduce it into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this RFP is 162 pages, titled Solicitation Contract Order for Commercial Items. And one of the things it says in the RFP is this: based on experience over the past few years, USCIS estimates that application petition receipt levels could increase or decrease from 0.2 on up to 2 million forms per year over the next 5 years. For asylum applications up to 2 million, and the decision has not been made by this administration to expand DACA, which is the foundation for this human tragedy of thousands of girls being raped on their way from the Central America to the United States. And apparently we don't have a conscience about what's happening to these girls, and boys too, by the way, in significant numbers of being sexually abused, not to mention the murders and the death that take place along the way. This administration has made the decision. This RFP put out by your administration would not have been put out if the decision weren't at least on the cusp of imminent. And can you tell me what might cause the administration to retract from this decision, this RFP asking for the ability to process, and by the way, USCIS, this is from the report, needs to acquire records management and support services for its service centers. The objective of the acquisition is to provide comprehensive records management services for 4 service centers in a manner that ensures efficient and effective adjudication, financial responsibility, and excellent customer service. I appreciate that part, and it anticipates implementation of new laws and policies as a cause for this. I think the administration's made the decision to totally tear asunder the rule of law and grant administrative amnesty to 5 or more million people, and do so while this Congress is out of session. How would you respond to that, Director Rodriguez?
Well, first of all, let me start by saying, am I audible? DACA offers no benefit to the individuals coming over the border. They are not eligible for DACA or any version of DACA. Secondly, to the extent, and I'm not familiar with the specific contract that you describe, we prepare for surges in work that can come from all kinds of sources. And so I will certainly look into that particular contract when I return to my office this afternoon, but I would not necessarily attribute it to the situation at the border. As far as adults, roughly 15% are asserting credible fear claims. As far as children, it is in the low single digits, the number of children who are actually making asylum claims at some point in the process. That's a different process than the credible fear process. So I just thought those facts would be potentially helpful.
We have those who are lawfully present during DACA, and there's an anticipation that DACA will be expanded. Anybody thinks that they think that if they can get into America, they get to stay in America, and we know that that number is well above 98% who get into America, who get to stay in America, and the asylum applications that come, this woman will apply for asylum. And before she's heard, the baby will be born, and there will be an anchor in this country. And that came right under my nose. I'd yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for being here, Director. I'm looking at numbers from USCIS from March of 2014, and it indicates, looks like through March of 2014, that there have been a cumulative total since 2012 of 553,197 requests approved under DACA, the President's law that passed his lips but not Congress. Do you have any updated numbers since March? Where are we now? It's obviously more than 553,000.
Yeah, I believe that, and we'll make sure to get the committee specific updated numbers. I believe that but please don't hold me to this. The number now is.
Well, who do I hold? I want to get somebody I can hold.
I want to get you the. I just don't have it at my fingertips right now. Get you the exact information you need. I believe the number is now at 714,000 of individuals who have been DACA recipients. That is my understanding.
I see. You said that in answer to an earlier question that you've heard people say that there's a culture of getting to yes, but you've also heard people say there's a culture of getting to no, and I would submit to you based on your own numbers that the figures bear out, there's a culture of getting to yes. You can't get to 700,000 and maybe have 20,000 no's and not have a culture of yes. So I would encourage you to look more harshly at those who say there's a culture of no. You said you observed a credible fear interview, and let me ask you, in your prosecutorial role, did you ever prosecute any drug crimes?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm curious, during your prosecution of drug crimes, did you ever refer to someone who gave money to buy a big load of drugs as a drug trafficking victim? Someone that paid massive money to get a load of drugs. Did you ever refer to them as a drug trafficking victim?
Yeah, let me suggest that perhaps we're talking about apples and oranges, but no, I certainly did not refer to somebody giving.
Well, let's talk about the apples and oranges, Director. When someone pays a human trafficker to move them, then I would submit to you they're not a victim, they're a participant in the human trafficking business. They're keeping the human traffickers in business. And when I was down there, let's see, weekend before last, south of McAllen, right on the river, talking late at night to one of the Border Patrolmen there, who was Hispanic, he was telling me that, 90% of the time when he asked them out there by the river, they say, oh, I was fleeing gangs and gang violence. And he said, I get tough with them because I know where they're coming from and I speak the language well. And I tell them, you may tell that garbage to somebody else, but you and I both know that it was gangs that brought you up here. That's who the drug cartels normally hire to bring people up here through Mexico. And he said 90% of the time or better, they will say, well, you're right, but we were told to say we're fleeing gang violence. Are you aware, Director, of who it is the powerful drug cartels in Mexico hire to move people who have paid their thousands of dollars across Mexico to the U.S.? Do you know who they hire?
No, not specifically. I mean, obviously, I know that the human trafficking environment involves drug cartels, involves all kinds of alien smugglers. It's not exactly our lane, so I'm not fully familiar with.
Would you call them criminals?
Human traffickers and drug cartels? Sure.
Yeah, that get paid to move people illegally into the United States.
Sure, I've prosecuted alien smuggling, yes.
Okay.
Of course,
all right.
Those are criminals.
And so I would submit to you, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about people who are paying criminals, and I would submit to you that the evidence will get down and dirty and show that there are many gang members that are getting paid to transport people to the U.S. only to have them get here and say, I'm fleeing gang violence. So I would encourage you to be more skeptical in these interviews without further evidence. And, Mr. Chairman, I would ask that I be allowed to submit to the record the evidence from Honduran Security Minister Arturo Corrales that there has been a tremendous drop in homicides between 2012 and June of 2014 from 3,245 to 2,634. So it doesn't appear the evidence is things are deteriorating down south. Thank you. I yield back.
Without objections so ordered, we will enter that into the record. We'll now go ahead and recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you once again for being here. Of course, I'm from Texas. Been to the border a lot. Was down there this weekend. Saw federal officials and state officials both trying to secure the Texas-Mexico border. Went down the river, Rio Grande River. They see us coming in a state boat. Folks that are in the water swim back. Coyotes in a raft moving folks. He bails and leaves a raft on its own. Rocks were thrown at us going down the river. Does not seem to be uncommon based upon the law enforcement officers that I was with. And just ask a lot of questions to the people who are on the front line about the influx of people from really all over the world. Border Patrol Sector Chief said, ask him, who's coming? He said it's 144 countries have come recently from all over the world, including Ukraine coming into Texas from Mexico. Shows the magnitude of the problem. Was in Honduras and Guatemala earlier in the year. Saw the beginning of of some of these folks that are making the trek. And here's the message, whether it's a right message or not, that if you get to the United States, you can stay, especially if you're 17 or under. You're going to be able to stay. The United States will take care of you. And so based on that, people move. The people motivating this are the drug cartels. In this whole scheme of things, the winners, the people who are making money, are the drug cartels and the coyotes. They're the ones that make the money off of smuggling people and trafficking people, which, as you know, as a lawyer, that is different. But they make the money. Drug dealers, for $6,000, tell folks in Central America, give us $6,000, that'll get you 3 tries to get into the United States. Get to the Texas-Mexico border, they're turned over to, individuals are turned over to coyotes, many of them, not all, but many of them, criminal gangs, MS-13 gangs, juveniles, under 17, criminals, to smuggle them into the United States. Many of them are used as bait in the sense that they start moving some people into the United States. Drug cartels call Border Patrol, say, here comes some more folks crossing the border. They use them as decoys to move their drugs further downriver, across the river. So the drug cartels are the criminals. That is in the MS-13 gang and the smugglers. So that message is out there that, right or wrong, that we'll take care of folks. People hear that all the way down to Central America and all over the world, 144 countries coming in. My question goes back to deferred action that has been talked about incessantly since you've been here all morning. Do you think that expanding deferred action to include more people is legal? If the administration does it, set Congress aside, if administration just defers action to another group of people, I'm not talking about specific individuals, but to another group, do you think that would be legal or not?
It is my understanding that there is, and my legal understanding, and it's something that's been acknowledged by scholars across the political spectrum, that yes, there is prosecutorial discretion which can be exercised in these sorts of situations.
All right. Is there a limit?
Of course there's a limit. It's based on whatever the law actually allows.
And what does the law allow?
In most enforcement realms, generally, there is pretty broad discretion.
So it could allow everybody?
I'm sorry?
I mean, technically, if it's broad, it could be expanded to allow everybody, just everybody who wants to come. I mean, if it's discretionary.
I don't think that's what anybody is suggesting or saying.
But you're not saying that it's unlawful to expand it?
Again, it is my understanding, based on my experience, based on my reading, that there is pretty broad prosecutorial discretion.
Based on your position, where you are in this long chain of immigrants and all of the things we've been talking about, expanding that concept of deferred action, do you think more people will come or less?
I think the key thing when we talk about DACA
is... Do you think more people would come, be encouraged to come to the United States?
Not if they don't believe that there is a benefit. And I think it's been made very clear that there is no benefit for individuals who are currently trying to address our border unless they have a claim such as an asylum claim.
But they may perceive that DACA will apply to them. Whether they realize the legal ramifications or not once they're here, that may... Don't you think that would encourage more folks to come?
I certainly think it's possible that there are unscrupulous individuals who are trying to deceive those people who are attempting to enter our country through the border. The fact is, DACA offers, or nothing like DACA offers those individuals any benefit.
They're surprised when they get here, in many cases, that DACA does not apply to them. Well, I mean, is that a fair statement?
I've actually looked at Latin American media where it's reported that DACA offers them no benefits.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back. I'm over time.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Holding, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rodriguez, thank you for being here. start with a little bit of housekeeping in reviewing your confirmation proceedings over in the Senate. I note that at an April 3rd executive meeting, Senator Grassley pointed out that you had admitted to the Judiciary Committee that you were personally aware of emails between political employees and career prosecutors discussing the decision to decline to prosecute the new Black Panther Party voter intimidation case, and that had contradicted the testimony of your boss, Mr. Perez. So I thought I'd take the opportunity to ask you if you were aware of any emails between Lois Lerner or a different member of the Internal Revenue Service and career prosecutors in the Department of Justice regarding the prosecution or investigation of conservative groups seeking tax-exempt status.
You're asking me if I know anything about Lois Lerner, Congressman?
If you're aware of any emails during
I only know what I've read in the paper about that situation. I've never.
So while you're in the Department of Justice as Chief of Staff for the Civil Division,
Civil Rights Division,
Civil Rights Divisions, Perez, you're not aware of any emails.
I have no involvement or any awareness other than what you and I both read in the papers, Congressman.
Are you aware of when the Civil Rights Division was tasked with beginning the investigation of the IRS?
I left the Civil Rights Division to go to the Department of Health and Human Services in September of 2011. I think you're asking about a specific individual who was designated to conduct some review. I'm not fully familiar. That happened, I'm pretty sure, long after I left the Civil Rights Division.
Okay. Also during your confirmation hearing, it was determined or discovered that you served on the Board of Directors of Casa de Maryland, which is an organization that was known for finding employments for individuals without proper documentation. So I assume you supported this objective of the organization while you were on the Board of Directors.
In the context of the community in which I lived, yes, I did support the commission.
Do you believe that prosecutorial discretion could be used to allow for finding employment or allowing for employment of individuals without proper documentation?
If the individual has a right, for example, through some sort of deferred action or parole or some other mechanism to be in the United States, then yes, those individuals can then be given employment authorization. In fact, it's often a good idea so that they're not in the shadow economy.
So, in your opinion, as an attorney, an experienced attorney at that, as the President looks at his options to continue to act administratively to change U.S. immigration policy, the chairman asked you at the beginning of the hearing as to whether, what you had reviewed, what were the President's next plans. I'd like to change the question a little bit and ask, in your learned opinion, what you know of the law, what do you think the President's options are to act administratively to change U.S. immigration policy?
So, of course, no decisions have been made. I think it's important to underscore that at the beginning. I think the options are many that are permissible under the law. I think that is a deliberation that is ongoing as we speak.
Give me 2 examples.
I'm not really in a position to be able to give specific examples other than to make the general observation that the options are many.
Well, you could give examples just based on your understanding of the law. You don't have to relate them to what the President's actively considering.
The DACA, as we've done it already, is one obviously very concrete example of how that discretion might be exercised.
All right. I was looking at a USCIS chart regarding the number of DACA requests by requester country of birth. And it lists the top 25 countries of the requester's birth. But there are 19,200 requests on this chart from other and unknown countries. So how many of those DACA requests have you received from applications whose home countries are listed as state sponsors of terrorism?
I am not specifically. I could probably tell you the top 5. Beyond that, I'm not specifically aware.
Did you get back with the
numbers,
committee and give us
we can certainly get back
specific numbers on that?
Absolutely, Congressman. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Now you're back.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and yield myself now to 5 minutes. Director, again, we thank you for being here. I want to walk through the process and understand some of the metrics. So if you're here, if you came to this country illegally, you can apply for DACA, correct?
If you qualify under the various criteria.
How old can you be before you file for DACA? How old can you be?
It is my understanding you need to be between, you can be no older than 31.
So you can be a 30-year-old and apply for deferred action for childhood arrivals.
That is correct.
At that time, you're also applying for, the guidance says, that you can apply for employment, a work permit.
That is correct. In order that you not be in the shadow economy, that you pay taxes, that you not be in a dependent status in any way.
So you come here illegally, and then you apply for DACA, and you get a work permit. Now, you said that there were more than 700,000 people that have been put into this process, correct?
That is I want to confirm those numbers with the committee.
Your written testimony says over 580,000, but you're now saying something like 700,000. It's hundreds of thousands of people.
It is hundreds of thousands, yes.
They're here illegally. You haven't gone through the proper channels. Now you are going to apply for DACA. You can be 30 years old. You get a work permit. How many of those work permits have been terminated or revoked?
So first of all, the key thing about these DACA individuals that they were brought here. They did not come here. These were individuals who were brought here.
How do you verify that?
Children. Based on their ages and what we know about their dates.
They could be 30 years old. So
they may well have been they would have been brought here as children. I mean, that is one of the criteria to establish.
How long are these interviews?
I am not specific.
How long was the interview you sat in?
I'm sorry?
How long was you sat in on one of these interviews?
The interview was an asylum interview that I sat on.
How long was that interview?
It was a full hour, that interview.
And we heard previous testimony from the last, I believe last hearing we had, that normally these hearings these interviews are 15 to 20 minutes.
If we're talking about asylum interviews, my understanding is, in fact, that they're generally far longer than that they are closer to about an hour.
So a credible fair hearing, you think is how long?
It was an hour. The one that I observed was an hour, and it is my understanding that that is the norm of
I think the record will correct you on that one. Of the people who applied or get DACA, they now have a work permit so they can compete for a job against a United States citizen. How many of those get terminated? If you're, for instance, convicted of a felony, how many of those are then terminated?
As of May 31st, as of June 31st, rather, well, I don't know the specific reasons for termination. 147 people have been terminated.
So you've approved. Wait, there's over 700,000, and there's been how many that have been terminated? 100?
I would rely actually on the number that's in my testimony. Again,
it's not specific. There is no number.
Oh, I thought you had a specific number of.
No, that's the problem.
Confirmed.
We've been asking you all.
In any event, you and I agree. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. There's no dispute about that. 147 individuals have been terminated as of the end of.
How do you get this information? If somebody's convicted of a felony in Utah or North Carolina, how do you get that information? Whose responsibility is that?
That is, it comes to us through various mechanisms. It could be reported to us by the individual as part of the renewal process.
Really? You think that's going to happen?
Could be, or it comes to us by other processes.
So you just wait for it
from
to receive?
law enforcement agencies. We find the information.
Do you get reports of this? Do you have a list of these information? Do you surf the databases? Or is there anything proactive that you do to get this information?
My understanding at this point in my tenure is that we get the information from a variety of different sources.
When you get this work permit, and you're here, are there any limits to the type of work you can do? Can you get a job in law enforcement?
If you are otherwise qualified for that job. Now, I know very often law enforcement agencies have various sorts of...
but there's no limits on the type of job that you can get.
In and of itself, there is no limit unless that job itself has some limits associated with it.
What do you say to the United States citizen who's doing everything legally and lawfully, that they're now competing for a job with somebody who came here illegally and applied, and the Obama administration said, well, we're going to defer that. You can go ahead and compete for that job. What do you say to that person?
I've had the opportunity during the course of this brief time as my tenure to meet some of the DACA recipients. These are individuals who are going to school. In one case, somebody who's about to graduate from
What do you say to the citizen who now has to compete with 700,000 people in the workforce that wouldn't be there otherwise?
What we have explained about the exercise of prosecutorial discretion, we don't have the resources to remove 10, 11 million individuals. And so the question is, are we going to let them persist in the shadow economy, or are we going to have them work and pay taxes? So the choice that has been made is to enable them to work and pay taxes and go to school and become upstanding citizens.
That's not what the law is, and that's what's sickening about this. I'll yield back and now recognize the gentleman from the gentleman from Arizona. My apologies, Mr. Trent.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Sir, I guess the first thing to deal with any problem is to try to dissect it and see, to analyze what it is. And from my perspective, there are two main concerns that I have. Number one, that the rule of law and the Constitution of the United States has been undermined here and continues to be undermined. And number two, that there are tens of thousands of children that have been put at terrible risk and continue to be put at risk. Now, I'm convinced, I'm just going to tell you up front where I'm coming from. The EPIC intelligence report from July 7th, 2014, interviewed a significant number of these unlawful immigrants that were coming over. And 95% of them cited that the primary reason for migrating to the United States was the perception of United States immigration laws granting free passes or permisos allowing them to stay. So there's no question in my mind. When you see, you've got projected from 2011 through 2015 now, a 2,230% increase in these unlawful immigrants coming over the United States border. Now, that's a systemic issue there. And I am absolutely convinced that the President's telegraphing of a message to Central America and Mexico and other places is the fundamental reason that's occurred. And so I lay the suffering and some of the things that happened to these children at the feet of the President of the United States. I have no doubt about that. And certainly that's an opinion, but it's a strong conviction, and I think one upheld by the evidence. So my question is really to try to deal with those two things. First of all, I know your oath of office included swearing to uphold the Constitution. I'm not trying to be tough on your arrogant here, but I'm just trying to make a very important point. How will you be able to defend the President's end run around Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, which specifically bestows on Congress the duty to create immigration law, given his rewriting the law at his executive whim? How do you deal with your oath of office in following some of those perspectives?
Yeah. Well, among other things, I don't necessarily accept the characterization that we're simply ceasing in any way to enforce immigration law. We are exercising our discretion to prioritize the most important cases, the most serious cases for enforcement and removal and investigation, and focusing on those in dealing with individuals who are not in those categories.
All right, well, let me try to accept that then. So then would you agree that the President, do you agree? I'll ask you, I'll leave it an open question. Does the President now have the ability, with existing funding, to help begin to stem the flow of unlawful immigrants in the United States? Does he have that capability now?
There's certainly some capabilities. Certainly the administration has made clear that it needs additional funding in order to deal with what has been a significant surge, one that we all agree is a significant issue, a significant surge across the border.
But I mean, he can't do that now, correct?
More resources are needed to deal with that.
So are you saying that without additional funding, that the President cannot cease to use his prosecutorial discretion authority to shield a whole categories of unlawful immigrants from prosecution, or he cannot implement tougher standards for credible fear claims? He can't do that without additional funding, correct?
Well, the credible fear standard is a standard that's in law. And
it's also a standard, as you know, has been accepted at almost 600% greater incidence than it was before under this administration, almost 600%. And I'm just wondering, how do we close our eyes to the fact that this president's message to Central America and other places was that we won't do anything, and that if somebody comes over, that is their perception. And it occurs to me that if the president is the cause of this, and I absolutely believe the American people understand that he is, that he also then has the ability to send a different message and to end both the suffering of these children. And I believe that's real. There's, you know, sometimes they try to make it that people want to secure the border, like I do, that somehow we don't care about the children, and we do. And I'm convinced that the children that we might give a better living standard here, we're going to hurt 4 or 5 more by incenting them to make that treacherous, dangerous trip wherein they run into all these kinds of problems. So if we're going to stem that issue, can't we call upon the president to send a message back that, no, that there's a false thought here that they will just be welcomed here and they won't be sent back? Because right now they don't think so. And he's getting ready to do some other executive order that certainly underscores that concern.
That the message that these individuals, for the most part, will ultimately not qualify to stay in the United States, that message has been delivered.
Well, they're not hearing it, my friend, because 95% of them say that this is why they're coming, and that's this president's fault. And I wish I didn't have to yield back. You can go ahead and answer the question, but I yield back. You go ahead and answer the question.
Yeah, the flights have started going back, and the message has been delivered that, in fact, in most cases, these individuals will not be able to stay in the United States. That message has been delivered by the President, by the Secretary. It's been delivered many different ways, including by leadership in those countries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Director, can you clarify, when you say most cases they're going to be sent back? There's no metric that I see that says that.
Well, in other words, recognizing that some individuals may be able to claim a status that enables them to stay in the United States, either qualify for asylum or be able to establish some other status that enables them to stay in the United States. In the majority of cases, these individuals will need to be returned to their countries.
Now I recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the time, and let's get right to it. And just a little bit ago, DHS Secretary Johnson testified before this committee on May 29th, and he claimed that the administration's unilateral amnesty policies have created legal ambiguity for the status of illegal aliens. I objected to that point at the time, and on page 6 of your testimony, you write that DACA does not confer legal status on a recipient. So you agree with me that Secretary Johnson is wrong that any deferred action or prosecutorial discretion, it creates a legal ambiguity?
Well, it certainly doesn't create a permanent status. I think that's the thrust of your question.
No, the thrust of my question is here legal or not. I mean, what Secretary Johnson basically said is because of these mismatch of policies, we've created legal ambiguity for people who walk across our borders illegally. And according to your testimony, you seem in DACA was one part of that, mismatch of priorities and programs. Would you agree with Secretary Johnson? Do you believe this is a legal ambiguity, or do you believe that they're illegally into the United States, coming in illegally, that there's an ambiguity to that situation?
I don't know the specific context in which Secretary Johnson might have been speaking. Are people who are benefiting from DACA, do they otherwise have a legal right to be in the United States? And it is a requirement in order to qualify for DACA that you not have another legal basis to be in the United States. Those are individuals who in fact are not gaining any sort of permanent status through being able to be in the DACA program. But I don't know the context in which Secretary Johnson's comments about legal ambiguity were made, so I'm not really able to speak to them.
Well, okay, I'll just ask you directly. Do you believe there's a legal ambiguity that is caused by the differences of, and he actually included states and other things, that it goes back down to the bottom line. If you cross over our border illegally, that doesn't automatically, by the basis of fact or changing or diversion or discretion, change the legal fact that you walked across our border illegally, correct or not?
I suppose that's true by definition, Congressman. I mean, in order to qualify for the DACA status, again, you have no other legal basis. it means you have no other legal basis to be in the United States.
Yeah, well, let me just follow up on that, because I apologize. I've had to go out to. I've had several different meetings going on, but I think during earlier when Chairman Ms. Chavis was asking you, you had said that a requirement of DACA is that they were brought here by someone else, and that's just not true. DACA only requires claiming to have entered before age 16, even if lawfully on a visa, and be under 31 when applying. I think sometimes, there needs to be, and I think there's some misunderstanding here on DACA and some of the things that many of us don't like because of the way it basically has subverted the regular process. Let's just move on to something else at this point. What steps have taken as part of the advanced team planning effort Secretary Johnson mentioned on February 7th in anticipation that there will be some sort of path to legalization? How much has been spent on that?
I don't specifically know. I do know that there were efforts to prepare for the possibility that comprehensive immigration reform, specifically as contemplated in Senate Bill 744, I can certainly get back to you with that information.
Okay, can we have time and money on the written answer that you'll provide back?
Yes.
Thank you. New York Times reported that the Obama administration is prioritizing the processing of DACA applications over those trying to enter the country lawfully. In fact, until recently, a U.S. citizen could obtain a green card for an immediate relative in 5 months or less, but after the administration instituted DACA, the service diverted its attention to DACA recipients and the typical wait lengthened to 15 months. Why are you prioritizing illegal aliens over the immediate relatives of U.S. citizens?
Okay. First of all, I'm pleased to report that the I-130 petitions have now returned within normal processing times. We have surges of work that come from.
So you're saying they're within 5 months now?
Now it's within 5 months, or around 5 months.
Okay, I apologize. I'm around 5 months or 5 months? Because around 5 months could be 8, it could be 10, it could be 2. I mean, I'm just trying to get a clarification.
It's at 5 months, Congressman.
At 5 months. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, let's go back then. I'm glad it's back to where it should be, but why was there ever a process in which you were prioritizing these applications over those who were immediate relatives of U.S. citizens?
Congressman, we have surges of work that come from all different sources. Our job is to implement the entirety of our mission, to balance among different lines of business. One of the things from the DACA experience is that we actually learned some important lessons on how we absorb surges in work, which is why we were able, over time, to return to our normal processing times for these I-130s.
Okay. Again, it's just frustrating, I know, for those who are here legally, who are doing it the right way, to have been put off for any length of time or surge over a program that is put them behind the priorities, and that's just something that's just very frustrating as you look at. How much has the service spent on DACA applications? Spent money-wise, time-wise on this, again, these applications. You talked about the surge, how you've adapted, how much have you had to divert, what does it cost you?
Yeah,
in that realm?
my understanding, and I don't know the specific, but what I do know is that the fee collected for employment authorization and for biometrics has enabled us to pay for the cost of processing the DACA applicants.
Can you
we can get back to you with specific information.
Would the gentleman yield?
My time has expired at this point. But I'll get back to Chairman.
I just wanted to, as you proceed, it's my understanding, but please confirm this, that all of these applications were paid for by the applicants through their fees, and there was no taxpayer funds involved in these application processes.
Congressman, that is my understanding as well.
If the gentleman from Georgia will yield back, we'll. As we wrap up, Mr. Director, we have just a few items that we would appreciate if you would provide for the committee. First, regarding the DACA application, could you provide the metrics by which you can sustain this claim that there's no net expense to this? My understanding is there is no DACA fee. There is for biometrics, there is for the worker application, but if you have 700,000 plus people getting a DACA application and there's no DACA application fee, I'd be curious to figure out where you get those funds.
We will provide you information on the costs of DACA.
When do you anticipate that we're going to get this? What's reasonable for us to get these documents?
Would 30 days be appropriate? I'm not sure if the information is immediately available, whether it's going to take us some time to assemble.
Okay,
That's
30
what I would
days,
ask.
that would be fine. Next one is, of the 147 felony convictions, these are people, DACA recipients, the 147 who've been referred to ICE for removal. We would love to know how many of those have actually been removed from the United States, and have they been referred to ICE for removal? I'd probably should ask that in reverse order. How many of those 147 have been referred to ICE for removal, and how many of them have actually been removed from the United States? We also need updated credible fear numbers, and we would also like to know how many work authorizations have been granted. This would be comprehensive over everything that you do, not just one, if you can break it out in category, but certainly how many work authorizations have been approved.
Thank you, Congressman. We will work to get you that information as soon as possible.
If you can break that number out for the work authorizations for DACA, we would also appreciate it. Again, is it reasonable to think that we could have these questions within the 30-day window?
I believe so. If I am mistaken about that, I will certainly let the committee.
We hope that you can prioritize that. We appreciate your participation here. Welcome. This concludes today's hearing, and I want to thank the witness for attending. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness or additional materials for the record. The hearing is now adjourned.